Let me ask you, where did you get is your avatar, is that like some kind of like a Mid-Journey Dali sort of situation?
Yeah, so I've been through a couple of them. This one I actually made on Midjourney, and it was with Canva because you gotta have the background remover.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's pretty badass. How did you come
thank
up
you.
with the name Odin?
I didn't have the foresight to do capybara. I was looking for something that could do like languages and traveling. So what gets along with everybody, what communicates with everybody,
Mm-hmm.
and the first person who I really grabbed onto in the jungle was BowTied, and then Apollo made my first profile picture. And so it's like, okay, you know what? I'm going to go down the mythology route, and Norse mythology is my favorite because I have a fondness for the idea of cyclical time.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Odin is supposed to be the bringer together of all these different races and all of these different species. And so that's kind of where I got the idea.
Oh, interesting. Like so he's like kind of the symbol for multiculturalism to a certain degree.
Yeah, essentially.
Oh, awesome. I'm a big Neil Gaiman fan. He writes a lot about, well, he wrote a book called Norse mythology, but it's also like sprinkled throughout a lot of his books.
I'll have to read in on that because I'm always interested in stuff like that.
Did you ever see American Gods, the show?
No, what's that on?
Oh, one of the streaming platforms. I forget. I think they did two seasons of it. It's a book
American.
he wrote, and the main character is Odin. So if that's yeah, if you're into it, I'd highly recommend it because it basically takes a ton of characters from Norse mythology and drops them into like present day United States.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, it's a badass show too, man. It's fucking awesome.
I'll check it out.
Hell yeah, man.
Sweet. And what's your background, if you don't mind me asking?
Uh, I guess like a lot of things, it's sort of a long story, but I grew up in Chicago. Spent a lot of my 20s abroad. So I came out here to LA for college to go to UCLA, and then immediately after graduating moved out to China, where I was in China for about 2.5 years during the Olympics, and came back, got a degree in business, and then got really deeply enmeshed in startups. Did a startup I've done a couple startups myself, but did one that kind of took off where I got sort of learned some programming skills, and then have more or less been working as a programmer ever since. um but I had studied linguistics when I was at UCLA. They have like a really strong linguistics department. Studied abroad twice, once in Madrid and then once in Barcelona, and like totally loved it, and was like very, very crazy about like, saying like I'm not speaking any English. I'm just like immersing myself, going like full bore at it. So I got really good at Spanish, and then used that as the jumping off point to learn Italian and French. I think for the last 2 or 3 years I was in college, like I'd never had a semester where I wasn't taking at least two language classes. And yeah, and then I mean, kind of working in startups, wasn't traveling quite as much as I used to, but kind of embracing the language side of coding, which I think this is an interesting topic too, man. There's a lot of overlap there between kind of like the part of your brain you use to learn, French, and the part of your brain you learn to use to learn JavaScript. It feels very similar. So here I am, man. And yeah, I've like, obviously like I love to travel and stuff. So I've like dabbled and especially love languages. So I've dabbled quite a bit with building like language technology. Never really had a project that took off in any big way, but yeah, maybe one day. And yeah, like you've seen me on Twitter, just like nerding out on language stuff, because it's just one of those things like I think about a lot. I'm always like, I've been trying to learn Korean. I'm always like learning a language. You know what I mean?
Oh, I get that. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's funny you mentioned multiple language classes because I know how exhausted you could be like writing finals in three languages.
Yeah.
It's not an easy feat.
Mm-hmm. But I think like, I mean, I was a linguistics major, and I think that this was uh I like the language classes more. Yeah, it's not easy to do the finals in a bunch of different languages, but at the same time, it was also a little bit less of a dry subject than, you know, something like phonetics or like syntax or things like that.
Yeah.
But I was always a historical language nerd. So that was what really got me into that was what the class that convinced me to study linguistics in the first place was taking a history of English class. And has always been like the thing that I'm like, I just nerd out on so hard is, you know, like what's the etymology of this word? Where did it come from? Like, you know, this is one of the reasons I want to learn more German. I've studied a little bit of German, but my German's pretty terrible. Is that there's so much overlap, like, you know, historical overlap with English that one, I find it really interesting. And two, I find it like half the time I could practically like understand German, even if I, you know, just listening to it, just coming from my English.
Yeah. And in my experience, once you learn how to understand the grammar and how they lay
Mm-hmm.
sentences out, German's pretty easy to understand. Speaking it, because then you have to formulate in that weird grammar they use. That's different, but
The cases.
not necessarily the cases, but like it took me a long time to get like the second verb, it goes at the end of the sentence, no matter what the sentence structure is otherwise.
Oh, so it's like if you say like I want to go to the store, is it like I want to the store go?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
And that took me some time to understand. There's still some things where I'm just like, okay, why is it this way in past tense, but not this way in past tense? But I harp all the time on like, I don't really care if I use the right past tense. I'll get corrected, but they'll know what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Well, Korean one ups that because Korean the verb is always at the end of the sentence. And so a
Oh,
lot of times when you're forming sentences in your head, it feels like I found like the most effective way to do it was to just pretend it was like backwards English, you know?
okay.
Like if I'm like, I want to go to the store, it's like I to the store want to go. But it's always like the last word is always, always, always the verb.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be tough to get down to.
Yeah. They do case markers though, and it's the first language I've studied. Yeah, it's the first because Chinese doesn't really have that. It's the first language I've studied where, other than the verb at the end, you can kind of throw anything however you want because they have a particle that tells you something's a subject, and a particle that tells you that something's an object, and a particle that tells you that something's like a place that you're, you know, a directional place. So you can say like, you know, I want to go to the store, like I to the store want to go, but you can also be like, you can switch all of the, you can say celery store I want to go and buy. And it doesn't matter what those first three or four objects that, you know, if you have a bunch of objects or a bunch of or like the subject or whatever, like it's crystal clear which one is which because you actually put like a particle on there. So
Okay.
the grammar's weird, but it's not actually that hard. It just takes like some getting used to.
Well, that's my argument for grammar generally is
Mm-hmm.
it's important, but not as important as vocabulary because you can mess it up. And like as long
Mm-hmm.
as the words are right, then people are going to really understand what you're saying. But if you use
Yeah.
the outright wrong word, then you might be in trouble.
Oh, absolutely. One of the stories I have is I grew up with a Polish guy, and we were like skateboarders together. And used to go like, but dude, we spent like hundreds of hours in the car driving around skate spots in Chicago. And his English wasn't amazing, but at the same time, we had like he was a fun guy and like really interesting. You know, love to talk about like politics and philosophy and all kinds of shit like that. You know, so we just be driving around skate spots and just talking about every possible subject. Had like some of the best conversations I've ever had. and his English was probably like he was making a lot of grammar mistakes, you know what I mean? But after about 30 seconds, if you're talking to someone who's not a native speaker, but is an enthusiastic speaker and who understands you, where you don't have to like repeat things over and over, like you don't even realize it anymore. You just kind of like learn how to roll with it.
Yeah, there's a certain point of communication where it's like it doesn't really matter if it's perfect. And that's another thing I harp on all the time is like most people don't speak their native language perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
So worrying about speaking a new language perfectly is not worth your time or effort.
Yeah.
When I was living in Belgium, French is notoriously hard to write.
Mm-hmm.
And um I had never taken physics. I had just graduated high school in the US and I was doing basically a second high school senior year in
Mm-hmm.
Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
I was a Rotary Youth Exchange student with the Rotary Club. And um by the time they're in senior year, I was taking sixth year physics, having
Mm-hmm.
never looked at physics before in my life. And I was taking it in French. And I didn't know French when I showed up to Belgium. So I'm sitting in this 6 years physics class, like, oh, this is going to suck. And I would just write notes or like a little letter to the teacher apologizing for not knowing what I was talking about. And by the end of the year, he's like, you write better than a lot of native speakers. And it's like because you pay attention to it when it's not your native language. I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
that, if German, who's been studying English for 8 years, probably writes better than I do technically.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I used to say that about my Spanish because I learned Spanish so precisely. Like, this is like the past pluscum perfecto, or like here's how you do past subjunctive. And I remember at one point, and I had all that like locked in because I just drilled like crazy. And at one point being like, I don't think I know how to do subjunctive in English, or at
Yeah.
least I do. I mean, clearly I do know how to do it because I talk and I can say these phrases. But if you ask me to be like conjugate that, I'd be like,
Yeah, yeah. I had to write a whole article about, how beneficial it is to know your mother tongue super well if you're trying to learn a new language.
mm-hmm.
Because if you know what the parts are called already, it's a lot easier than you're like, okay, I'm learning this and I'm learning the name of this part, which apparently exists in my language.
Yeah, yeah. It's 100. Well, you get with your own language, you never really think about it. I mean, I guess we have a little bit of English like grammar education, but not
Yeah.
not really too much.
And
So
it's not
tell
just, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, 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 go ahead.
Okay, it's not just like English speakers. I grew up one of my buddies who was just at my wedding. We are going to talk about honeymoons.
Mm-hmm.
He is a native Spanish speaker, and I would get better grades than him in Spanish class that we took together because I was learning the grammar, and he had no idea what the grammar names were.
Mm-hmm.
He
Yeah.
was like, "This is ridiculous. I'll go speak to my mom for 2 hours in Spanish, but I'm going to get a C on this test."
Yeah. There's a story about I think my great grandfather whose parents were Swiss German, he spoke German at home. And I know my grandpa told me about this, that apparently he had like my great grandfather had like flunked his German class, and it like pissed his parents off so much that they like sent him to some kind of boarding school or something like that. And it was just like, how do you flunk German? Like we speak German at home,
Yeah,
but it's
well,
different, like language classes are, they're kind of like secretly linguistics classes. It's not quite the same thing.
no, not at all. That could be why it can be dangerous to have a native speaker as a teacher because sometimes they're like, "What does this mean?" and they have no idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good for the conversation class. Like if you're getting,
Oh yeah,
or if you're doing like a Spanish lit or, French poetry or something, then it really works well. But yeah, when it's the native speaker, it's sometimes the answer is like, it just works like that.
well, I don't know how far into French you got, but basically, I was, I've been doing this for about a year now, and I was asking my buddy like, "Hey, what's up with this in French? What's up with this in French?" He was visiting in from Belgium for the wedding, and he's like, "You know what? It's just how it is." And I was like, French, the aesthetic language.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, how many languages do you speak and what have you studied?
So I have studied abroad twice, once in Costa Rica, so I speak Spanish, and then French. I just lived in Belgium, and then my German is a little bit rough, but I'm studying Russian right now.
Okay, so you're studying Russian. Did you live in Germany? You didn't live in Germany as well?
I did sort of just for a month. One of my close friends, he lives on the North Sea, and before I moved to Belgium with the Rotary Club, I lived with him for a month.
Mm, gotcha. Gotcha. Okay, so Costa Rica, Belgium, a little bit of Germany. Uh, which place had the best food?
Oh, probably. So Belgium has a wide variety of food,
Mm-hmm.
which is great, but I also like my whole half of my family is Mexican, so that spice thing really was an issue.
Oh,
And
is Belgian food spicy?
it's not spicy at
Oh, it's not
all.
spicy. Oh, okay. Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
So
Mm-hmm.
it was so bland. One time I added too much pepper to like a sauce I was making, and my hostess refused to eat it because it was too spicy.
This
I
is
was
like
like,
me growing up as a kid in the Midwest and with parents that are, from a pretty like Irish background. I literally don't think I had spicy food until I ate my first Chipotle burrito when I was about 17 years old. And then I moved out to LA where here there's spicy food is well, because there's so much Mexican food, like spicy food's kind of a way of life. And I still kind of tap out at about maybe a medium or a high medium, but I love spicy food.
I was going to say you can't go back. My wife is from Wisconsin, so she
Mm-hmm.
had a very similar experience, and now I always make spicy food, and she's like, okay, now I can't go back. I need some spice.
Mm-hmm. Well, my wife is Korean, and they do not play gently when it comes to spicy food. So my tolerance has been getting higher than ever.
So is that why you were up in South Korea for the honeymoon?
That's right. Yeah, man. I mean, we got married like over a year ago, so it was definitely like belated because we'd both been working a lot and things like that.
Yeah,
But it was fantastic. The only downside being that my wife is vegetarian, and Korea is maybe the least vegetarian friendly place I've ever been.
really?
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
man.
I mean, because it's all like, it really is like 4 out of 7 restaurants are Korean barbecue places.
Oh,
And even kimchi is made like fish, with like fish
interesting.
sauce and things like that. So it's just, yeah, vegetarianism is just not really a thing there. And there's a couple, like a lot of like, I think every major metropolis at this point, there's a couple of vegan restaurants and vegetarian restaurants. But we ended up eating a lot of Indian food.
Yeah.
Because that was like a sure bet. Whereas like some of the vegan places, like vegan Koreans places, it was not the best I've ever had. It was a little bit weak.
Well, LA's got some good spots, so they're
Yeah.
competing.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up getting Indian food, I think, 3 times on our honeymoon, also, but that's because it was the only place that had spice.
And where you were out in Belgium? Is that
No, we
right?
were in Majorca in Spain.
Oh, fuck. You were in Mallorca. How was that?
Oh my God. Majorca is unreal.
Yeah.
I loved it there. But what's interesting is you got to speak Spanish and German because all the signs are translated into German.
Really? Because there's just so many. Is that just because there's so many Germans that buy property out there and like retire out there?
Yeah, there's just so many Germans that they just translate everything into German and cater to that population a lot. And I wasn't even in the main cities. I was in the quote unquote residential area.
So were you speaking more Spanish or German or both?
Spanish, unless like we went to a restaurant. A lot of the restaurants were owned by Germans.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah, and it was very clear too. It was just a beer garden where they sold pommes, right? And that
Oh yeah,
was they had the fish sandwich, the brochin. It's like the fish still has its eye in it, and it's just on a piece of brioche bread.
there's a big range between there's a big difference between Spanish style restaurants and German style restaurants. Yeah, the beer garden versus the cafeteria.
Oh yeah,
So it was beautiful out there.
We had amazing weather. It's probably between 78 and 85 and sunny the entire time we're there.
Damn.
And we're staying at this Hilton that's at the top of like the highest point of the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
So from one side you see the sunset, and then you go up and look out the other side, you see the sunrise. It was unreal.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
congratulations, man.
Thank you.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
congrats on 1 year. It's
Well,
first year.
thank you. Yeah. No, it's been a great year. It's been going really well. Well, one, pleasantries aside, I wanted to like pick your brain and ask you some questions because you about learning languages because you run like a newsletter as well as have some, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but then you have some like courses and some, like articles you've written and things like that on specific topics. Is that right?
Yeah, so I've got one course, but I've got a website that I run and a newsletter, and I'm about to actually Tuesday will publish my 100th article on the
Nice.
website. So come it'll be a year, January 14th
Okay, so you're
will
doing
be a
about
year.
one every 3 days or so.
Yeah, the goal is two per week. So I usually do a Tuesday, Thursday, and then the newsletter goes out every Wednesday.
Wow, that's awesome. That's yeah, very prolific. Well done.
Trying to get as much out as I can. And recently I've gone down a new route of kind of like the course idea, but it's threefold. The first is like I just want to get people to conversational as fast as
Mm-hmm.
possible. Because once my whole thing is once you're having conversations, you're gonna become fluent. But if
Yeah.
you from zero to conversational is like the most crucial part. The foundation you lay is going to help you become more adept. The faster it happens, the sooner you'll start speaking fluently. And then once you're speaking, what's really the difference between conversational and fluent, at least in any like colloquial term or sense of the word?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Um,
mean, again, I just go back to my friend Luke Slamba, the same
yeah,
thing where, you know, being completely 100% fluent is great. And it sounds good. It's like a humongous achievement. But once you get to the point where you can understand what people are saying to you and you can respond, without having to think a whole lot, like it's just kind of automatic and you sound pretty good, like you're past the hurdle. That's a point when you're really like you're ready to roll. You could do a job in the language, you can like hang out with friends in the language, you can, all this good stuff.
exactly. And so my approach for that is through patterns. I
Mm-hmm.
I'm very big on like language patterns, especially romance languages, because that's what I know decently well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so like the Spanish one, the guide I have for like Spanish patterns is almost 50 pages long. Um, and
Wow.
I'm constantly working on that, but like focus on loan words, stereotypes. I have a strong belief that stereotypes come from somewhere. So
Mm-hmm. Sure.
people think that you turn a word into a Spanish word by adding an O to the end, right? And
Mm-hmm.
no, but also yes. So like minute is minuto,
Mm-hmm.
queso, caso, archive, archivo, right? Second, segundo. And you just go
Mm-hmm.
through there's hundreds of these words. And if you
Mm-hmm.
learn those, you're not necessarily taking up as much space as if you're trying to like learn everything from scratch.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. And this is also one of the advantages, of course, of like going like learning Spanish if you're an English speaker or learning Italian if you're a Spanish speaker versus, what I was talking about, like learning Korean is that there are a lot of loan words from English into Korean, but most of the base words are, the ones you use all day, every day are like, you just have to memorize them because they're not, they come from a completely different linguistic family.
Well, that's also why I wanted to take Russian on is I was doing all of this stuff and I'm like, I don't know how to teach an alphabet. And so I was like, well, if I want to
Mm-hmm.
teach an alphabet, I need to learn an alphabet. So
Yeah.
went with the Cyrillic alphabet. And interestingly enough, Duolingo has an incredible alphabet course.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote probably like it was like 5,000 words scathing review of Duolingo because I think it's good for beginners for like the first month just to get you used to doing something.
Mm-hmm.
and getting little wins. But eventually it's just like, okay, I've repeated the same thing 40 times. It's actually not helping anymore. I'm just getting frustrated. And
That's the thing
uh,
with Duolingo that's always frustrated the hell out of me is that it uses the same words and phrases over and over and over. And there'll be very seemingly random ones too, where you've been doing it for a couple weeks and it's still, the vocab word for, I don't know, like ant shows
yeah,
up for the millionth time. And you're like, I think I've only learned like 100 or 200 words on here. Like, why isn't it broadening my horizons a little bit? So that's always been my beef with them. Like, they have a nice platform and it looks good and the gamification is, well done. But for some reason, I mean, I think the reason that they say is that, it's better to lock in a few words than, gloss over a lot of words. But I found it to be annoying, to be honest.
yeah. I stopped using it because of that same reason. And there was a golden period from like 2017 to 2019 when you
Mm-hmm.
could download the entire course and do it offline. You could do all kinds of cool stuff. It actually moved to different sentences. It wasn't the same thing over and over. And now I think part of what I wonder if it's happening, and I haven't done any research whatsoever to verify this, but I think the job of an app is not to teach you a language, it's to make you open the app again tomorrow. And
Yeah.
so if you get your stars and you get your treasure chests, then it's like, all right, I did my thing for today. I'm going to come back and do it tomorrow. And you're like, okay, well, there goes the language learning part of it. You are completely gamed now. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
game.
Yeah, and this is a way like Silicon Valley is kind of it is a tendency. It loves its metrics,
Yeah.
and so you can sometimes feel the algorithm in things like that where you really are like, would it be better if somebody studied this for an hour every 2 or 3 days, or is it better if they do 5 minutes a day every day? And I mean, I'm sure there's cases for both, but yeah, with Duolingo, like it's so oriented towards like, you've got 5 days in a row. Now you won some gold coins or like whatever, whatever the hell their prize is. And it's as someone who works in tech, and has built a bunch of gamification stuff like this, like you almost get the impression that they're doing this so that they can like it can look especially good for their next like investor pitch or something along those lines, you know. But to your point, like, and this is something I've ranted about on Twitter, is like I don't think anyone's ever gotten fluent from using Duolingo. And I don't know if that's exactly their like what they would say that they're even going for, but at the same time it's, if you have effectively a language learning class, like the goal should be to get people to really learn the language. And yeah, with Duolingo I have some doubts.
Yeah, for me, they transitioned their marketing into saying like we've got whatever, I think 46 million language learners every day on Duolingo or whatever it is. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, great. There's 100 million language learners in public school every day. Guess how many
Mm-hmm.
come out speaking the language? I don't really
Yeah.
care how many are doing it. I care how effective it is going to be. One, two, three. There's 3 years of using Duolingo and you can't have a conversation. That's not right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what you were saying about getting people to to get them to kind of a conversational level. Like, I think that's maybe where some of the value is. Is like, let's say you were about to move to, I don't know, Italy in 3 months. One of the things you could do is just slam as much Duolingo, or like one of the honestly, like I prefer the competitors like Lingo Deer, which are all it is Duolingo, but they don't repeat words quite as much, you know. And it won't get you fluent, but it'll get you to that like low intermediate level, which you can then use as a stepping stone to hopefully get fluent.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then, to tack on to it, I don't think apps are used to learn language. I think they're great supplementation, like how
Yeah.
you would take protein powder after your workouts, but you
Mm,
still have to have the workout. I don't think there's very few apps that are going to challenge you enough that you're going to be able to progress at probably what you would want to every day.
yeah.
Um, my approach is like a little aggressive. Like an hour a day is a long time, but if you want to get good at something, and with learning a language, once you're at that conversational rate, then it's not necessarily an hour a day, and it could be more passive, like just listening to music or a podcast, or to teach my wife French, we watch reality TV because then you just hear how people actually talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
it's not
absolutely.
slowed down, and it's not pronounced well. It's not enunciated. It's just like what you're going to experience.
And if you're talking about like something like working out or like learning to code, an hour a day is actually doesn't sound crazy in those contexts, you know. So it's all about what the motivation is. And I think with language learn, especially for English speakers learning other languages, it tends to get put in the bucket of hobby, you know, so it feels kind of like a little less important. Which yeah, there's some truth in there, but I don't know. I think that you'd agree with me. Like, I wish more English speakers would learn another language. I think they'd really benefit from it.
I definitely agree, and not necessarily for the same reasons that you would learn, a language if you didn't speak English natively. I know we were talking about that on the Discord, but
Mm-hmm.
in terms of your brain health, in terms of your opportunities, in terms of traveling, it changes all of that so much that it should be mandatory whether you plan to use it forever or not.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason, like you said, it gets bucketed into hobby, and I think that's why you should attach languages to your hobbies, which is why I have that resource newsletter, because it's like, okay, well, you cook every day. How about you watch somebody and learn a recipe in Spanish? Like, watch her cook in Spanish, watch what she says, watch what she does, and then do that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, BowTied Woodworker, he's another guy who's like all into Spanish, and I was like, okay, I bet you $1,000 I can find you a carpentry video in Spanish, and I
Oh
did,
yeah.
and so he loves it, right? And it's like
Probably
you're doing these
hundreds of them
things,
on YouTube.
if not thousands, and
Mm-hmm.
so you're doing all of these things anyway. Why not do them in another language an hour every day? The terminology, especially if you're really enmeshed in that environment, you're going to recognize words even if you don't speak the language, because so much of the terminology is going to overlap.
Yeah.
So
Well, speaking of consistent gains, so if you've been, I was going back to what you were talking about writing your 100th article. Have you seen have you seen like the traffic to your, you know, to your website start to go up after such consistent performance?
finally, it is finally going up. There was a core November update which scared me,
Mm-hmm.
but it didn't hit me. It scared me because, like, I think 3 days ago I was going on like a no 0 days month, and then I had a one, and I was like, oh crap, we're back down. But
Mm.
the last couple days it's been like 8, 9, 9, and my highest ever is 10. So like that's great. I For me that's a huge win. I mean, this is a 10-15 year project for me, so to be getting 10 views a day on the website already is pretty nice.
Yeah, yeah, keep just, you know, keep pushing, and it'll, you know, those things like it starts to work exponentially, or at least like, you know, you're getting interest on it, and then 10 becomes 30, 30 becomes 100, 100 becomes, you know, 500. Before you know it, you're off
Yeah.
to the races.
In the month of June we had 8 visitors to the website, and in the last 28 days we've had 140.
Oh,
So
nice. Wow.
yeah, so we
So
are
that's
doing
really, yeah,
moving
showing.
along now.
And is that just you, or is that something you're doing with other people as well?
It's just me. It is a lot of stuff. But yeah, that one's just me. I've got another project that I'm working on behind the scenes, and my wife's part of that. And then maybe something else with a friend, but that's more of kind of like a consulting on his business type thing.
Gotcha, gotcha. And are you teaching or like doing helping people do language plans or anything like that? Or are you basically just doing writing and, you know, kind of like language influencer style
I,
stuff?
I'm it's probably primarily the language influencer type of stuff, but I do teach
Hmm.
French. Um, and like I did mention, I'm developing some Spanish classes, and aside from the language patterns to get people to conversational, the goal is to
Hmm.
get people to pass the CLEP exams.
Okay,
So
cool.
it's not necessarily a Spanish course so much as is the CLEP exam preparation.
Okay, and that's kind of like this Spanish language version of the TOEFL, right?
Uh, no, just because the TOEFL is to attend university here, and the CLEP is to
Uh-huh.
get university credits, but in the US.
Oh, so if you pass that, it's like it's sort of the equivalent. Like, so what exactly does what would you use that for? So, or not what you use it for, but are you saying that that's the equivalent of having studied through level 6 or something in Spanish at university?
Right. So
Gotcha. Okay.
it stands for college level exam program.
Uh-huh.
And basically, what it does is it tests. The goal is for students not to repeat classes with knowledge they already have. So the Spanish CLEP exam, you get up to 16 credits. So I think that's
Mm-hmm.
through 202. So you'd start Spanish 300.
Gotcha. Okay, so this is for people who are going to into college or potentially
Yes.
grad school. Okay.
Yeah. They could already be in college, but basically by taking this test, you can do your language requirement, but the test is $200.
Yeah.
So 16 credit hours for $200, that's a steal.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's really good. But at the same time, they're motivated to pass it. So even if I imagine you get people who are taking your class who are even like native speakers or grew up speaking at home, but are like, oh, I don't want to take this test and fail it. So I might as well
Make
take
sure.
this. Yeah, make sure like we were saying, make sure you understand like what all the verb tenses are and things like that.
Right. And like I mentioned, it's not necessarily as much a Spanish course as an exam prep course because exams, you're not necessarily teaching the language. Like, yes, you need to know Spanish in order to do this, but this is specifically what they're going to be looking for and what they have always looked for. And I have like historical exams, and we do kind of like walkthroughs,
Mm-hmm.
explanations, things like that, because, you know, most and especially if they're at least at an intermediate level of Spanish, the context clues are going to help with a lot of the reading and stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
if you read the question wrong, no amount of knowing the Spanish is going to help you get it right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and some of that stuff like really does get into more grammatical issue. Like, you could speak Spanish perfectly, but if you don't understand the question because it's more of a linguistic question, that's gonna be a problem.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of who would you use this verb tense with, and it's a formal. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, is it your parents? Is it your girlfriend? Is it your boss? Is it your brother? Right? It's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, if you know that the question's asking about the formal verb tense, because that's not how they word it. It's like, how would you use or why would you use usted? And it's like, okay, well, it's got to be then my boss. It can't be the
Yeah.
other three. And then, managing your time is another huge part of exam prep. So then that's one of those questions where it's like, okay, there's only one answer. You know what the question's asking, find that answer. You don't have to read the rest of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So,
did at one point after college, I did like SAT and GMAT prep. And there is
okay.
there is a lot of that to it where it's, you know, from the outside, it seems like, oh, these are really difficult questions. And then you realize, like, no, it's actually, there's just a couple of different types of questions they ask. And understanding the format and understanding what all the tricks are makes it pretty easy to actually do a really good job on them.
Yeah. And so that's what the CLEP stuff is based around. But there's only three French, German, and Spanish CLEP exams for languages.
Yeah. Okay. I have another question for you because this is something I don't fully know the answer to is uh, what is the origin of the BowTied phenomenon on Twitter?
Okay, so it all started with BowTied Bull,
Okay.
and they do crypto finance. They stemmed from the Wall Street Playboys.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
So it's multiple people who run the Bull account, and they were
Mm-hmm.
all Wall Street Playboys. Um, and the idea is to create a network state. So outside of an established nation, do you have teachers, medical, physical, like every service that you might want or need, can you get it outside of an established nation on a quote unquote network nation that's digital?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where it really comes from. There's no There's no rules. So basically, one day I was like talking to BowTied, and this was September of last year. I was like, "Man, this jungle thing's really cool. I've been following Ox for a while, gotten some good shape. Been following
Mm-hmm.
Bull now for a little bit, starting to understand crypto a little bit better. How do I join?" He's like, "You just put a bow tie on." So I made a handle, made a profile picture, and here we are.
And so is the idea that each of the bow ties has a specialization, and like in this network state idea, they sort of represent like one area.
Yeah, essentially that's it. And then the other idea is like, eventually one day you want to sell your business, or you want to have so many businesses that you can sell a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't necessarily want your name tied or attached to anything. That
Mm-hmm.
way you can cut the cord. Like, I'm never going to have to worry about a brand being like, well, your face and name's on it. Then I'm not going to buy that because we need your name and face. And now I don't have to sell my likeness to anybody. Eventually one
Mm-hmm.
day I just cut the cord and then nobody has to know. It's very, you can't, the thing is, you can't, brag to people about it, even if it's going well, because nobody knows. So it's not like I can go to my mom and be like, "Mom, guess what I'm doing right now?" It's like, no, just job hunting.
But I feel like explaining any internet stuff to my mom is kind of a non-starter. Be like, what are you talking about?
My extreme
Twitter?
internet friends.
Yeah, 100%. So is that one of the goals here, is to start this language business to ultimately sell it?
Yeah, in like 15 years, um, I want to completely change how most people, and ideally the school systems. I'm working with some school districts, local school districts right now, to see if I can't push some changes into the system.
Nice.
But ideally, just overhaul how everything's approached, and then that way, if you can get, I'm just imagining like our classes were 30 students. If you could get 20 kids speaking, even if it wasn't perfect, just back and forth, that would
Mm-hmm.
change how schools learn languages, at least students in school.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I'm also doing stuff with homeschool families and private stuff. So I don't really know what the end goal is going to be. I'm just trying to build and spin as many plates as possible.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Well, that's one of the things that I'm trying to do is host like language I guess language experiences for that same reason, where I'm like, conversation's the only way to get really good at stuff. Uh Classrooms, I'm also kind of an anti-classroom person, because for me, I learned more Spanish, sitting in bars talking to old dudes than I ever
Yeah.
did in a classroom.
Playing cards and
And
drinking beer.
yeah, so and it's yeah, and then a lot of times it's also like while doing things. So I think people don't realize how much more Spanish or English or French or whatever you'd learn taking a cooking class in French than you would sitting in on a French just like a French class, because the act of actually doing things and having like kind of skin in the game that way, where you're not just memorizing language, but you're actually using it. And so it's kind of like burning the pathways in your brain. I don't think people really appreciate like how effective that actually is.
Yeah, it's wild. I see some of the things online. It took me 7 months to learn French from scratch, but I had night French classes. I
Mm-hmm.
had my host family barely spoke English. None of my friends spoke English at school because the stereotype about native French speakers and English is very true.
Mm-hmm.
There's just nothing there. Um, I had supplement classes. I like all I did all day, every day was French, and it took me
Yeah.
7 months. So I get very frustrated when I see some people that are like, "Oh, you could be fluent in 3 months." I'm like, I don't know about that.
Yeah. Oh, do you know
But
that are you talking about that brand Fluent in 3 months?
no, I got an email the other day. I don't know who it was from. Um,
Oh, because there's a company. So I actually met the founder of this when I was out in Korea. He's this like kind of famous Irish guy who's well, he says he speaks 20 languages, but it's more like he's like studied 20 languages. And he literally just travels around like nonstop. Like when we met him in Korea, he'd been there for a month, and then he was about to go to Tanzania and start learning something. And then after that, he was going to like Brazil or, things like that. And it's his whole brand is just like essentially nonstop travel and language learning. But he has a company called Fluent in 3 months. Though when I drilled on him, he kind of said that like, yeah, the idea is not that you actually get like perfectly fluent, i.e., like, almost native speaker level, but really more like conversation level.
Okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense because it wasn't that company, it was something else, but it was like, do you want to be fluent in 3 months? I'm like, okay, everybody would like that, but and that's some of the people that I work with, I tell them all the time, I'm like, conversational in 3 months is absolutely possible,
Mm-hmm.
but there's targeting fluency is just it's gonna frustrate you because you're not gonna get there.
It's a lot to learn. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, especially if
It,
you have anything else going on.
mm-hmm. Well, and like the military trains people, and it's still for them, it's not 3 months. For them, it's, like 10 months, 16 months, like all kinds of stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
you know, and that's with like, the CIA training their top operatives for 40 hours a week, plus like, sending them in country and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's a little ambitious. Although I do think on the flip side, I have also found that a lot of people underappreciate how fast you can get pretty decent at a language.
Oh, I agree. I think the time frame of 3 months is a weird time frame in that it's weirdly short, but also feels really long. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
3 months, that's like a quarter of the year, but it's like, yeah, but it's also nine, you know how fast 90 days goes by?
Yeah.
And so like what you were saying, I have somebody I'm working with who's learning Spanish right now, and he's already having conversations with people he works with who speak Spanish natively. And
Mm-hmm.
he's been doing it for about 4 months now. And he's like, man, I thought for sure it was going to take like 8, 10 months to start talking. I'm like, no, no, speaking, you can get there pretty quick. It's like, if you want to get fluent, if you want to be a translator, you're going to need a year and a half. But if you
Mm-hmm.
just want to talk to people, 3 to 6
Mm-hmm.
months.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for something like Spanish, where once you get Spanish, really, it's like the verb conjugations is the most complicated part. But once you get that locked in, the rest of the grammar kind of slides in like fairly, I don't say easily, but it's not too
Minor
bad.
shifts.
Yeah, exactly.
Spanish, the alphabet is the most beautiful part because every word is said exactly how it's written.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Unlike
I,
French and unlike
man,
English too.
yeah, English is wild,
Mm-hmm.
but French messed me up for a while.
Oh yeah. Okay, well, we got a question from Schulbert, who's on this call. What do you think of Duolingo versus Rosetta Stone?
I actually don't have any experience with the Rosetta Stone, so I can't really speak to that. But
Right on.
Pimsleur, Babbel, those I can give a little bit of an idea about.
Yeah, Rosetta Stone was, I mean, that was early. I remember Rosetta Stone like buying the CDs for that back in the, I almost want to say late 90s or early 2000s.
Well, they've
I don't,
kept reiterating it. It's still getting updates.
yeah. And do they have like a Duolingo style? Like, have they kind of embraced that, or are they? My impression is they're kind of like the Skype of the language learning world. Like they were number one and then kind of like dropped the ball. But I honestly don't know. I haven't used them in at least a decade too.
I just looked, they have an app, so I might have to hop on that app into a Rosetta Stone review. I,
Yeah.
Babbel, I've had some great luck with. I like Babbel quite a bit.
Yeah.
Um, and Pimsleur is it's good for some people. It's a lot of conversational speech, but unless you're actually willing to repeat the conversation out loud, it's not
Mm-hmm.
super helpful.
What's Pimsleur's approach that's different from like the Duolingos of the world?
It's just straight up conversations between native speakers. And then you kind of fill in how that conversation would go. It gives you yes, no options, and you kind of go through that.
Oh, that's
But it's
interesting.
all, yeah, it's all conversations with native speakers.
Okay.
Um, but it fails in the same way that most language apps fail, in that you just don't have an incentive to speak.
I see. And it's so am I getting this right that it's also it feels like it's maybe intended for kind of like more like intermediate advanced users than something you could start like, you don't even know anything about the language and you could start on it.
Yeah, yeah, I think it would definitely be better for intermediate and advanced learners, at least from my experience with it. But I did do their little like test just because I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
see what the middle of their French program would look like. So I did like their aptitude test, and it threw me in. And it was, I think the best part of it is so one of the reasons I love Costa Rica is because they enunciate and they speak very clearly and slowly, and that's
Mm-hmm.
how Pimsleur approaches languages too. However, you're not always going to have that. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're going to learn Spanish and you're going to use Pimsleur, then you're going to want to go to Costa Rica or Colombia, somewhere they speak slowly and enunciate. But if you find yourself in Spain, you might be like, okay, this is a whole new Spanish I have to learn now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you
So
find what do you think of the Spanish accent?
I don't like it. And here's why I don't like it. It's not even because Spanish people. It's because people who visit Spain don't know
Mm-hmm.
why it is how it is. And so they'll use the lisp for any S sound, even though that's
Yeah.
not what it's used to differentiate. And so
Yeah. No, I learned my Spanish in Madrid. So I learned it like Madrid and
yeah,
cerveza. And
yeah,
I've had to explain like a million times to a million people that it's not a lisp unless you think that the words sink, like I went to the kitchen sink, and think as in like I'm thinking about bow-tied Odin. Like
yeah.
if you think that that's a lisp, then yes, it's that. But really, it's a way of differentiating between like what's the C and the Z versus just the plain S.
The S, yeah.
And it was actually like did you ever go down to Andalusia, like Granada, Sevilla, or like Almeria, anything like that?
Yeah, well, not this. I've been to Sevilla though, not this
Okay.
time.
Yeah, it was more like down there they combined those two, and then apocryphally they say that that's because all the ships, like Columbus's ships and all the conquistador ships left from the south of Spain for the New World, that they brought that accent with them effectively. But yeah, it's people think that they're the
Interesting.
madrileños are like adding a lisp, but really what it is differentiating between two different like sets of characters that are for two different completely sets of words.
Yeah.
Theta versus sera, like things like that.
Yeah.
um
So
so yeah.
for I understand why it's done, and that's why I don't have anything against like Spanish people for doing it.
Hmm.
But it's the people like we were on the train with this lady from Vancouver. And
Hmm.
so we were staying in Murcia, which
Hmm.
is East Coast, Spain.
Hmm.
And she I guess they had a house there and they go back to visit all the time, blah 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 blah. And so she would say Murcia all the time, just but
Hmm.
we're speaking English. And then she was like, "Oh," and then we made it to Barcelona the other day. I'm like, "Oh, so you don't actually know what you're saying or why you're like."
Well, I'm a context switcher, so I have a little bit of a pet peeve of people who do be like, "Oh yeah, last year I went to Buenos Aires."
Yeah,
They have to kind of prove themselves, even they're speaking English, but then they have to say the name with like as most accurate of an accent as they can. I sort of get why people do it, but I find it to be like maybe a little bit pretentious at times.
I have a huge pet peeve with it because you have to be consistent if you're going to do it. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to say like faux pas is like I guess technically a saying. It's French,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a saying. But whatever it is, if you're going to say it, then you better do it for every single loan word that we have, like
Mm-hmm.
rendezvous. What is the other one that I was thinking? Oh yeah, uh, croissant. You better every single French word you better pronounce with a French accent if you're going to do it because you want to sound quote unquote cultured.
Oh yeah, I'm going to the bakery later. Hey babe, can I get you a croissant?
Yeah, maybe a
Or even just
baguette.
or even just calling it Paris versus Paris in
Yeah,
English would sound, even though like again that's totally accurate, everyone would understand you, but it sounds a little, it just doesn't sound right to be like, oh yeah, like last summer we went to Paris.
Yeah, exactly. The best sandwich I ever had was in Barcelona.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get very irritated by that stuff. My wife has to hear about it a lot.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. Yeah. Um, cool, man. Well, I want to open it up. I don't have too much time, but I have another like 10 or 15 minutes if anyone has any questions for our man BowTied Odin over here.
And I'm always available for questions on Twitter too. I'm just hanging out most of the time.
Jeffrey,
Hey guys, what's up?
a French speaker, a French Turkish speaker.
Hello.
Yeah. Question for you. BowTied Odin. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yes, you did.
Cool. So I attended late, so I might have skipped this part. But how many languages can you speak so far?
Four. I speak four.
Okay, which are English, Spanish, French, and
German. And my Portuguese isn't too bad, but I haven't
which
had
Portuguese, by the way?
Brazilian.
Oh, okay. And because I've heard that you can speak Spanish from Spain, if I heard correctly.
I learned in Costa Rica, but for me, I know it decent
Okay.
enough that I can speak with anybody.
Yeah,
Did you?
because sorry, Jack, be my guess.
Oh no, I was gonna say, did you? Am I making this up? Did you say that you grew up speaking some Spanish too?
Yeah, I did. I did. My grandmother's from Mexico.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. And so you said that you've learned French uh during like how long did it take for you to get are you fluent in French, by the way?
Yeah, yeah. We could switch to French very easily right now if you wanted to.
On va parler
Je peux
français?
Oui, je peux essayer si tu veux. Ça t'a pris combien de temps?
Il m'a fallu 7 mois pour être parfait, on dirait. Mais pour commencer à converser, c'était plus ou moins 4 mois.
Mais t'as fait comment?
Bah, j'avais des cours pendant le soir. J'avais trois familles différentes qui ne parlaient pas anglais et j'avais aucun ami qui parlait anglais. Donc, j'avais pas le choix.
Ouais,
En
t'étais
fait,
en immersion totale, quoi. Bah forcément,
ouais,
ouais,
exact. Et j'étais
super.
crevé tous les jours parce que,
Ah,
euh,
c'est un truc de fou.
ouais, en
Ok,
fait,
super.
j'étais en sixième secondaire et pendant mes études, j'avais cours d'espagnol. Il me laissait pas prendre cours d'anglais, je sais pas pourquoi, mais j'ai eu cours d'espagnol en français, ce qui était très dur, mais
Bah,
j'ai
attends, mais
quasiment...
t'es natif de quelle langue? Excuse-moi de te couper. T'es pas américain?
Si, si.
Ok. Et t'avais des cours en espagnol?
Oui, à l'école en Belgique.
D'accord, donc tu es né aux États-Unis?
Ouais, j'ai fait l'échange en Belgique.
Ok. Ah
Il est
Ouais,
ouais.
aussi, il est aussi de Californie. Ouais.
Ouais, mais
ouais.
t'as attrapé le mouton à cinq pattes là, Jack, si tu vois ce que je veux dire. Tu connais l'expression ou pas?
Lequel?
Le mouton à cinq pattes.
Le mutuel 5 pattes.
Le
Non,
mouton, the sheep with the
je connais pas.
Legs.
five legs, five legs.
No, what does it mean?
Kind of the black sheep, you know, the rare breed, like the a lion comes from Mars or something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible. Congratulations on that, by the
Nice.
way.
Thank you. I don't know if you understood everything that I was saying, but basically I had
Yes, I did. I did.
Jack.
Oh yeah, I did. I was actually pretty
Oh,
stoked that I was
okay.
able to
My
follow
bad.
that conversation. My French
Good.
is not as good as yours,
It's
but
solid.
it's all right. Yeah, it's I
Well,
one time I called
Solid.
Jeffrey's English solid, and I think
Yes.
he loves that
I
phrase.
love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm quite curious about my English because, you know, French people, when they speak English, in my opinion, this is a disaster. They don't pay attention to for example, you have to aspirate the H,
Hmm.
like you have to say ha. They
Yeah.
don't do that basically in French. And you have to put the accurate stress on the accurate syllable as well, etc. So I try to pay attention to that when it comes to speaking English. And this is still a conscious effort when I'm speaking English, if you see what I mean. It's not natural, you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
Hmm.
it took me a long time. So it was interesting. My last host family, The mom was actually an American. Moved back to Belgium, married the guy that she was dating when she was on exchange. And so when I was living with them, I spoke French to him and English to her. So I learned to switch really, really well.
Wow.
And that was quite the experience.
Yeah, I believe so. That's interesting that you've come to learn a language this quick, because it's been like 4 years since I've started to learn Turkish. And I can handle a basic conversation, but there are times when I can't really understand what the other people is saying. Whereas when I speak with Jack, when I'm listening to you, etc., I understood 100%.
Mhm.
So because it's been like maybe 20 years since I've started to learn English at school or whatever, being immersed with the language. But with Turkish, it hasn't been too long, but it's not a matter of months. So uh, I might get some tips and tricks from you, but from what I understand so far, you have to be completely immersed. You have to soak your brain somehow, speaking face to face, attending lessons, which I didn't. Because you spoke about the school system's efficiency, which is a disaster in France as well. And I feel reluctant to attending to lessons.
Oh yeah, and so this is what I'll say is like I have a big thing I preach a lot, and I call it localized immersion, which is basically building yourself an immersion environment in your home. So like even if you only do it for an hour a day, you only hear things in Turkish, you only speak Turkish, you only read Turkish, you only write Turkish for 1 hour every day, and you don't look at anything else. And
I
that's how
feel
I'm
that
doing it.
because it's also about not giving yourself an out,
Exactly.
like creating that time frame when not only can is it only speaking Turkish, but you're you're not allowing yourself to speak in English. One of the things that was really interesting when I was doing Spanish originally, and I was in at the University Complutense in Madrid, was I was in this like uh, kind of taking a couple classes, but one of them was just immersions, just like a 2 hour long like immersion Spanish or some kind of Spanish class. And the professor was like, okay, one of the rules is don't use your hands. Like if you can't say something or you're trying to say something, like don't start pointing or gesticulating or anything like that.
Yeah.
Like, just like with a toddler, it's like use your words. Like say, practice saying what you need to say and don't give yourself don't try and like give yourself any assistance or give yourself an easy way out or anything like that.
And I would say in line with that, like don't don't sequester yourself to a certain level. Like the day I landed in Belgium, well, probably a week after, but whenever I started school, I joined 6th year French class, right? And so they're going through literature, they're going through Voltaire is the first thing that they're reading through. And so I got out my little pocket dictionary that was half English, half French, and I looked up words and I wrote them all down and I translated Voltaire to learn French.
Yeah.
There's no level to vocabulary. So whatever you enjoy doing, you should do it in Turkish because you're going to use that vocabulary when you meet people. You want to talk about your interests and your hobbies. Well, then you should be doing your interests and hobbies in Turkish so that you know how to talk about them whenever you meet
Yeah.
somebody.
I can do that before. The main pain point, sorry, is that I've learned Turkish just by mimicking my wife, who's Turkish, by the way. So when I speak, I may sound that I'm either a native speaker on rare occasions or someone who's at ease with the language. But sometimes some people they have either um, you know um, high words, very rare words like oh, I couldn't translate that, but du langage soutenu.
Yeah.
How would you say that in English? Not familiar, not a street speech, but
You say it one more time in French.
langage soutenu.
the
Langage.
Langage soutenu.
um
Hmm.
uh
formal Turkish, for example, formal, okay? So, with words that I have never heard, and in Turkish, you have a lot of synonyms.
Yeah.
So when you learn a word, you basically got to learn the other synonyms, otherwise you may get lost.
Mm-hmm.
And when I don't understand people, I feel like I suck at Turkish. Whereas I don't suck at Turkish, basically. I made progress every single day, but I'm impatient and I want to feel as, let's say, fluent or solid, Jack, as
Mm-hmm.
I am in English,
Yeah.
How often do you write?
I don't.
But
I mean, I chat with people in Turkish, but I don't write.
okay, well, as much as it sucks, right,
Okay.
because part of I think the hardest part about learning a language is learning to think in that language. And
Yeah.
so you are going to spend more time listening to the language than you're going to spend time doing anything else with the language, because that's just how it
Yeah, that's
works.
true.
And
That's true.
so understanding, translating inward is not nearly as hard as translating outward. So when you're
Mm-hmm.
writing, it's your thoughts. You have to translate them. And
Mm-hmm.
eventually that translation switch goes away and it just comes out naturally. But writing is the amazing way to do that while you're working through it. And then it sounds like you speak fluidly enough, but if there's any words or phrases or sentences you want to practice, then read them off the paper too. Read them aloud until you can say it fluidly, because if you won't even make a mistake in front of yourself, then like you're going to have a real rough time speaking with anybody else. But if you can
Definitely.
sit
Yeah.
there and make mistakes in front of yourself, and the one thing that I tell everybody to do but nobody seems to do is go back and look at what you wrote the week before and correct it, change it, add a synonym, see how
Mm.
you could change it. Like always be iterating on your previous stuff, because one day in a month or 2 months you're going to look back and be like, wow, that's a really basic sentence, look at what I do now.
Yeah.
Also,
Tracking your progress.
Yeah,
keep in
exactly.
mind too that learning a language, it's you're improving steadily, but it feels like a series of plateaus where I'd say right somewhere around like mid-level, when once you get conversational, i.e. you can like understand what people are saying and you can like converse pretty well, but it's still like fairly rough around the edges. You're missing a lot of words. You're saying stuff wrong. And then it feels like you're not improving. Whereas really you're still improving at this rate of, 5 words a day or something like that. But you're just not noticing it. Whereas going from 0 to that point, it's like you feel like these huge gains. But if someone from the outside saw you, 3 months ago speaking Turkish versus speaking Turkish today, they might say like, wow, you've gotten so much better. And you're kind of like, oh, I did? Like, oh, okay, cool. And then of course there's also the thing where when you're learning a language, the more you learn, the more you realize there's like so much to learn. Like
Yes.
you'll think that you're good, and then someone will say a word that you've never heard before, and you're like, oh man, like how much do I not know? So, and this is, true of every
A lot.
subject on planet Earth, but these two kind of create a bias where you actually are getting better, but sometimes it doesn't feel like it.
Well, it's also why I'm a proponent of quote unquote outside your level, because imagine giving a native speaker that feeling of like, I've never heard that word before, but I know what it means,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. It's a cool feeling. So the I just
Yeah,
think
thank you for the tips.
writing is going to be your best bet here,
Okay,
because it sounds like you're doing
I'll give
everything
it a
else
try.
right.
Do you speak with your
I
wife in
have ideas
Turkish?
actually. Say it again, Jack.
Do you speak with your wife in Turkish?
With neighbors, I'm used to speaking French with my wife. Sometimes I speak, basic stuff. I say basic stuff to her, but when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to having, important conversation, it's immediate
Mhm.
French. I could switch to Turkish, but at I don't feel at ease enough. Can I say
Mm-hmm.
that?
Yeah,
Okay, I don't feel at ease enough to speak proper Turkish in such situations.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I think I'm going to have to call it here.
All
It
right.
is, but Odin, it's been great talking to you, man. And Do you want to give a quick plug for your site, your newsletter, like everything like that?
Yeah. You can find my Twitter at this same name, and then secondlanguagestrategies.com. So that's going to be the website, and then YouTube, Second Language Strategies. And all social medias, you'll find me at BowTied Odin.
Secondlanguagestrategies.com.
I've followed you already.
Awesome. Thank you.
How to learn a language.
Say again.
I was going to say, if you interact with me a lot, I follow you back too, but I just.
BowTied, could you send the link somewhere or repeat it, please?
For Twitter?
Yeah, Twitter or your website or whatever. Any reference?
I'm about to post it on the Discord. If you give me one.
Okay,
second.
cool. Thank you very much,
perfect.
Zach, and thank you so much for organizing this conversation. It was really, how do you say, insightful. That's it.
Nice. Well,
Yeah.
I love talking about this stuff, and
Yeah.
BowTied and Odin and I have chatted quite a bit on the old Twitter about like language strategies and stuff. So it was really cool to get you on and kind of nerd out about all this. Yeah, and maybe we'll do it again sometime. I'd love to continue the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was awesome. It was great to talk to everybody, and I hope I could help a little bit. And it's always, I love comparing and contrasting stuff because you've got a lot of ideas that I haven't even thought of yet. So I definitely think we should do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. And and we're both kind of like getting involved with various aspects of the language business. So, maybe one day we can do a project together or something like that.
Off recently, but there might be some in the future.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, I'm about to post I'm about to post your second language strategies. I'm going to throw your Twitter account, and let me know if there's anything else, but I'll basically throw that in the Discord for anyone to pick up on. Sound good?
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Thanks again for joining. And Jeff Schulbert, thanks a lot for the great questions.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot, Jack.
Thanks
BowTied,
all three of you
thank
guys. Have a good one.
Cheers.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Cheers.